She thought she was saving a lost child from the desert's deadly heat. But when the boy's warrior father appeared over the dunes, everything she knew about fear, courage, and destiny began to change. Thank you so much for watching, and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. In the summer of 1873, Sarah Winters found herself standing at the window of her modest adobe home, gazing out at the vast Arizona desert that surrounded her small ranch. At 32, she had already endured more hardship than most. Having lost her husband Thomas to pneumonia just 3 winters ago, she now managed their small cattle ranch alone, with only occasional help from passing travelers or local townspeople. The morning heat was already oppressive, the sun climbing higher in the cloudless sky. Sarah wiped the perspiration from her brow and adjusted her simple cotton dress, preparing for another day of hard work. She had moved west with Thomas 7 years ago, chasing dreams of a new beginning far from their troubled past in Boston. Now, despite the challenges, she couldn't imagine returning east. Another scorcher, she muttered to herself, filling her canteen for the day ahead. The cattle would need extra water today, and she had fencing to repair on the north side of her property. As Sarah saddled her chestnut mare, Penny, she noticed a strange movement in the distance, a small dark shape stumbling across the sand. Squinting against the harsh morning light, she realized with a start that it was a child, a young boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old, wandering alone in the merciless desert heat. "Good Lord!" she gasped, quickly mounting Penny and urging her forward. The boy was clearly Native American, dressed in simple leather garments now torn and dusty from his journey. As she approached, she could see his small face was red and blistered from the sun, his lips cracked from dehydration. When she reached him, the child collapsed to his knees, eyes glazed with exhaustion. Sarah dismounted swiftly, approaching slowly with her hands visible, not wanting to frighten him. "It's all right," she said softly, though she knew he likely wouldn't understand her words. "I'm here to help you." The boy's eyes widened in fear as she approached, but he was too weak to run. Sarah slowly offered her canteen, miming drinking motions. After a moment's hesitation, the child reached for it with trembling hands and drank desperately. "Easy now," she cautioned, gently pulling the canteen back. "Too much too fast will make you sick." The boy spoke a few words in his native tongue. Apache, Sarah guessed, based on what little she knew of the local tribes. She shook her head apologetically. "I don't understand, little one, but you're safe now." With gentle movements, she lifted the exhausted child onto Penny, then mounted behind him. He was burning with fever, his small body shivering despite the heat. Sarah knew she had to get him cool and hydrated quickly. Back at her ranch, Sarah carried the semi-conscious boy inside and laid him on her bed. She worked methodically, bathing his face and arms with cool water, coaxing him to drink small sips, and applying a soothing salve to his sunburnt skin. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring words she couldn't understand, perhaps calling for his family. "What happened to you?" she whispered, stroking his dark hair back from his forehead. "Where is your family?" As the day progressed, Sarah continued to care for the boy, checking on her cattle only briefly when necessary. By evening, his fever had broken, and he slept more peacefully. Sarah sat beside the bed, mending one of her shirts by lamplight, occasionally glancing at the child's face. Who was he? How had he come to be alone in the desert? Were his people searching for him? These questions troubled her as night fell across the desert. She knew there were Apache bands in the region, some hostile to settlers, others maintaining an uneasy peace. She had always kept her distance, respecting their territory, and they had left her small ranch alone. The boy stirred, opening his eyes. This time they were clear and alert, taking in his surroundings with confusion and fear. "You're safe," Sarah said softly. "My name is Sarah." She pointed to herself. "Sarah." The boy watched her silently, then slowly pointed to himself. "Nakohe," he said quietly. Sarah smiled. "Nakohe," she repeated. "It's nice to meet you." For the first time, the child's face relaxed slightly. He sat up, accepting the cup of water Sarah offered. Outside, the desert wind picked up, whistling around the corners of the adobe house. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the boy tensed, eyes darting to the window. "We're safe here," Sarah assured him, though she knew he couldn't understand her words. Still, her tone seemed to calm him. "Tomorrow we'll figure out how to find your people, but tonight you rest." As Nakohe drifted back to sleep, Sarah moved to her rocking chair, wrapping herself in a blanket. She would sleep here tonight, giving the boy her bed. As she gazed at his peaceful face, she felt a protectiveness she hadn't experienced since the loss of her husband. She had no children of her own, a deep sorrow she carried silently, and now this child had appeared, as if delivered by the desert itself. But she knew he wasn't hers to keep. Somewhere out there, his family must be desperate to find him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, they were both safe from the dangers that lurked in the vast, unforgiving wilderness beyond her door. Dawn broke with streaks of orange and pink across the eastern sky, as Sarah stirred from her uncomfortable night in the rocking chair. She glanced at the bed where Nakohe still slept soundly, his breathing deep and regular. The worst had passed, and relief washed over her. She moved quietly about the small house, stoking the fire and preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush, sweetened with the last of her precious honey. The smell of food roused the boy, who sat up cautiously, his dark eyes following Sarah's movements. She smiled warmly at him, gesturing to the table. "Hungry?" she asked, patting her stomach. The universal language of food needed no translation, and Nakohe slid from the bed, approaching the table with tentative steps. Sarah placed a bowl before him, demonstrating how to eat with a wooden spoon. The boy watched intently, then mimicked her actions perfectly, his hunger evident in the speed with which he emptied his bowl. "Slow down," Sarah laughed softly. "There's plenty more." After breakfast, she attempted to communicate with gestures, trying to understand how Nakohe had ended up alone in the desert. The boy seemed to grasp her question, pointing eastward and then making walking motions with his fingers. He held up 3 fingers, which Sarah took to mean he had been wandering for 3 days. 3 days alone in that heat, she murmured, shaking her head in amazement at his survival. "You're a strong one, Nakohe." Through more elaborate pantomime, Sarah gathered that the boy had been traveling with his people when he wandered off to chase a rabbit and became lost. Her heart ached at the thought of his fear and confusion, alone in the vast, unforgiving landscape. "We need to find your family," Sarah said, pointing to Nakohe and then out the window. "They must be worried sick about you." The boy's face brightened with understanding and he nodded eagerly. Sarah hesitated, considering her options. The nearest town, Willow Creek, was a day's ride away. She could take the boy there and ask for help, perhaps find someone who could speak Apache. But relations between the settlers and Native Americans were strained at best. She feared what might happen to Nakohe if she handed him over to the wrong people. "I reckon we're better off trying to find your people ourselves," she decided aloud. "First, let's get you cleaned up and properly fed. You've had quite an ordeal." Sarah heated water and helped Nakohe wash away the desert dust. She found an old shirt of her husband's and cut it down to size for the boy, who seemed delighted with the soft cotton garment. His own leather clothes she washed and laid out to dry, knowing he would want them when he returned to his people. Throughout the day, Nakohe followed Sarah as she completed her chores, watching with curious eyes as she tended to her small herd of cattle, repaired fencing, and worked in her vegetable garden. The boy proved eager to help, carrying small tools and learning quickly how to pull weeds from among the precious plants. As they worked side by side under the hot sun, Sarah found herself talking to Nakohe, as if he could understand every word. She told him about Thomas, about their journey west, and about her life alone these past 3 years. "I never thought I'd be grateful for this place," she said, gesturing to the modest ranch around them. "Thomas chose it, you know. Said it had good water and decent grazing. I thought he was crazy, bringing us so far from everything familiar." She paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "But now I can't imagine being anywhere else. There's a freedom here I never knew back east." Nakohe listened attentively, occasionally offering words in his own language that Sarah couldn't understand. Yet somehow, a connection was forming between them, transcending the barriers of language and culture. As evening approached, Sarah noticed Nakohe growing restless, repeatedly looking toward the eastern hills. He tugged at her skirt and pointed, his expression urgent. "Your people are that way?" Sarah asked, pointing east. The boy nodded vigorously, pulling her hand as if to lead her. "We'll go tomorrow," she promised, miming sleep and then pointing to the rising sun. "First light, we'll set out to find them." Nakohe seemed to understand, though his impatience was evident in his restless movements throughout the evening. As they ate a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Sarah heard the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching her property. She tensed, reaching for the rifle she kept by the door. Visitors were rare, and not always welcome. "Stay inside," she told Nakohe firmly, guiding him toward the back room. The boy's eyes widened with fear, but he obeyed, crouching behind the partially closed door. Sarah checked that her rifle was loaded, then moved cautiously to the window. In the fading light, she could make out several riders approaching slowly, at least 6 men on horseback. Their manner of dress and the way they sat their horses told her immediately that they were Apache warriors. Her heart hammered in her chest. Had they come looking for Nakohe? Or was this a raiding party? Relations between settlers and the Apache had deteriorated in recent months, with violence flaring on both sides. Sarah had always kept to herself, hoping to avoid trouble, but she knew that wouldn't necessarily protect her. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the house, and one man dismounted. Even in the dimming light, there was something commanding about his presence. Tall and straight-backed with an air of authority, he walked forward alone, empty hands held slightly away from his body in what Sarah recognized as a gesture of peaceful intent. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Sarah placed her rifle against the wall, though still within reach. She opened the door and stepped onto her small porch, her own hands visible. The warrior stopped at a respectful distance. To Sarah's surprise, he spoke in accented but understandable English. "I am Kayetin, war chief of the Chiricahua Apache. I seek a boy, my son, who was lost 3 suns ago." Sarah's tension eased slightly at his words. "I found a boy in the desert yesterday, suffering from the heat. He's here, and he's safe." A flash of emotion, relief, hope, perhaps gratitude, crossed the warrior's stoic features. "May I see him?" Before Sarah could answer, she heard the patter of small feet behind her. Nakohe darted past her, crying out in his native tongue, running straight toward the tall warrior. "Shikade! Shikade!" the boy called. "Father," Sarah guessed from the emotion in his voice. Caden knelt, catching his son in a fierce embrace, holding him tight for a long moment before setting him back to examine him for injuries. The warrior's face softened as Nakohe spoke rapidly, gesturing toward Sarah and the house. The other Apache riders remained at a distance, watching silently. Sarah stood still, acutely aware of her vulnerability, yet moved by the reunion between father and son. After Nakohe finished speaking, Caton rose and approached Sarah, his expression now one of solemn gratitude. "My son tells me you saved his life," he said, "that you gave him water, shelter, and healing when he was near death from the sun." Sarah nodded simply. Any decent person would have done the same. Caton studied her face for a moment. "No," he said finally. "Many of your people would have left an Apache child to die, or worse." He glanced back at his son, who was now showing off his new shirt to the other warriors. "I owe you a debt that cannot be measured." The desert night had settled fully around them, stars appearing like scattered diamonds across the vast sky. Sarah stood awkwardly on her porch, unsure of the proper protocol in this situation. Caton turned and spoke to his warriors in their native tongue. After a brief exchange, the men dismounted, though they remained near their horses, maintaining a respectful distance. "We have searched for 3 days without rest," Caton explained, returning his attention to Sarah. "We would be grateful to make camp here tonight, if you permit it. We will depart at first light." Sarah hesitated only briefly. Custom demanded hospitality, even in these dangerous times. "You're welcome to stay," she said. "There's a good spot by the creek just beyond those cottonwoods. Water for your horses there too." Caton nodded his thanks, then whistled softly. The warriors led their horses toward the indicated location, while Nakohe remained, clutching his father's hand but looking back at Sarah with conflicted emotions plain on his young face. "Would you and your son like to come inside?" Sarah offered. "I have stew keeping warm on the stove." The Apache chief seemed surprised by the invitation, but inclined his head graciously. "We would be honored." Inside her small home, Sarah felt suddenly self-conscious of its humble furnishings. She ladled thick venison stew into bowls, while Nakohe chattered excitedly to his father, occasionally pointing to various items around the room. Caton listened attentively to his son, his eyes taking in every detail of the simple home. "Your son learns quickly," Sarah commented, placing the food on the table. "He was helping me with chores by midday, as if he'd been doing them all his life." Caton's mouth curved slightly. "He is clever, like his mother." A shadow passed over his face. "She walks with the spirits now, 2 winters past." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly, understanding the pain of such loss all too well. "I lost my husband 3 years ago." Their eyes met briefly in shared understanding before both looked away. They ate in companionable silence for a while, until Caton spoke again. "You live here alone?" he asked, glancing around the house. Sarah nodded. "Just me and the cattle. Neighbors are few and far between out here." "It is dangerous for a woman alone," Caton observed. "There are bad men among both our peoples." "I manage," Sarah replied with quiet dignity. "This land was my husband's dream. I couldn't bear to leave it." Caton seemed to consider her words carefully. "Dreams have power," he said finally. "To honor such a dream shows a strong heart." After the meal, Nakohe's eyes began to droop despite his obvious effort to stay awake. Caton rose, lifting his son effortlessly in his arms. "We will join my warriors now," he said. "Tomorrow I would speak with you again before we leave. There is a matter of debt between us." Sarah shook her head. "There's no debt. I'm just glad Nakohe is safe and back with his family." Caton's dark eyes held hers steadily. "Among my people, a life saved must be acknowledged. It is our way." With that, he carried his drowsy son out into the night. Sarah watched from her doorway as Caton walked to the camp his warriors had established. The men had built a small fire, its flames casting dancing shadows across the desert landscape. She could hear the low murmur of their voices, occasionally punctuated by what sounded like Nakohe's excited tones as he fought sleep to tell his adventure. Returning inside, Sarah prepared for bed, her mind filled with the day's extraordinary events. She had grown accustomed to solitude, to the rhythm of her days unmarked by human company. Now, with the Apache camp just beyond her cottonwoods, she felt an unexpected sense of comfort in their presence. Dawn had barely begun to lighten the eastern sky when Sarah awoke to the sound of activity outside. She dressed quickly and stepped onto her porch to find Caton directing his warriors as they prepared to depart. Nakohe, now dressed once again in his traditional Apache clothing, spotted her and ran over, his face alight with excitement. He spoke rapidly in his native tongue, gesturing toward the horses and then to the distant hills. Sarah smiled, kneeling to his level. "You're going home," she said, miming riding a horse. "That's wonderful, Nakohe." The boy suddenly threw his arms around her neck in a fierce hug. Sarah returned the embrace, surprised by the strength of emotion that welled up inside her. She had known this child for barely 2 days, yet saying goodbye felt unexpectedly difficult. Caton approached as Nakohe released her, his expression thoughtful as he observed their interaction. "My son has grown fond of you," he said. "He says you have a gentle heart like the summer rain." Sarah smiled, touched by the poetic comparison. "He's a special boy. You must be very proud." "I am," Caton agreed, "and I remain in your debt for his life." He reached into a leather pouch at his waist and withdrew something wrapped in soft deerskin. "This belongs to my family. It has protected us for many generations." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal a beautifully crafted amulet, a polished turquoise stone set in intricate silverwork hanging from a leather cord. "This is too valuable," Sarah protested. "I can't accept such a gift." Caton shook his head firmly. "It is not given lightly. The stone carries the blessing of my ancestors. It will watch over you as you watched over my son." He held it out, his expression making it clear refusal would cause offense. With reluctant hands, Sarah accepted the gift. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." Caton nodded, satisfied. "There is something else." He gestured toward the hills to the east. "The lands beyond the 3 mesas are claimed by my people. Other Apache bands sometimes raid the white settlements, but I give you my word. No harm will come to you or your cattle from the Chiricahua while I am war chief." The significance of this promise was not lost on Sarah. In these troubled times, such an assurance of safety was perhaps even more valuable than the turquoise amulet. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing no elaborate words were needed. Nakohe tugged at his father's hand, saying something in Apache while pointing at Sarah's garden. Caton listened, then translated. "My son says you grow plants that heal. He showed you have little left of some medicines." Sarah nodded. "My herb garden is small. Some things don't grow well in this soil. You mightn't considered this. Before the next full moon, look for a sign at your boundary stones. There will be plants, healing plants from our mountains. Plant them when the moon is growing, and they will flourish." Before Sarah could express her gratitude for this unexpected gift, one of the warriors called out something that caused Caton to straighten, his demeanor shifting subtly back to that of a leader. "We must go," he said. "The journey to our camp is long." Nakohe gave Sarah one last quick hug, before running to join the other warriors, who helped him mount a small pony. The boy sat proudly, already showing the natural horsemanship of his people. Caton swung himself onto his own horse, a magnificent black stallion that pranced impatiently. "You have a strong spirit, Sarah Winters," he said, surprising her with the use of her name, which she didn't recall telling him. "May your days be many, and your cattle grow fat." With that, he wheeled his horse around and led his warriors eastward, Nakohe riding in their midst, occasionally turning to wave at Sarah until they were nothing but distant figures shimmering in the morning heat. Sarah stood watching long after they had disappeared from view, the turquoise amulet cool against her palm. For the first time in 3 years, her ranch felt different, not just a place of work and memories, but somehow alive with new possibilities. She finally turned back to her house, slipping the leather cord over her head so that the amulet rested against her heart. There were chores waiting, cattle to tend, fences to mend, the endless work of survival in this harsh land. But as she set about her tasks, Sarah found herself humming a half-forgotten tune from her childhood, her step lighter than it had been in years. 2 months passed, the rhythm of ranch life continuing as it always had for Sarah. The summer heat gradually mellowed into the gentler warmth of early fall, bringing with it spectacular sunsets that painted the desert in hues of gold and crimson. True to Caton's word, a carefully wrapped bundle of herbs and seedlings had appeared beside her boundary stones just before the full moon. Sarah had planted them as instructed, and to her amazement, they had taken root and flourished despite the challenging desert conditions. On this particular morning, Sarah rode the perimeter of her property, checking her fencing and water sources as was her custom every few days. The turquoise amulet Caton had given her hung around her neck, never removed since the day of his departure. Though she would never admit it aloud, she found comfort in its presence, a tangible reminder that she was not as alone as she had once believed. As she crested a small rise, Sarah noticed dust in the distance, riders approaching from the direction of Willow Creek. She tensed instinctively. Visitors from town rarely brought good news. Shading her eyes against the sun, she counted 4 men, their posture and dress identifying them as townsfolk, not Apache. With a sigh, Sarah turned Penny toward her ranch house. Better to meet them there, on her own ground, than out in the open. By the time the riders reached her property, she was waiting on the porch, rifle propped casually beside her rocking chair, visible but not threatening. The leader of the group, a heavy-set man Sarah recognized as Jasper Wilkins, the owner of Willow Creek's general store, reined in his horse and tipped his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Mrs. Winters," he called. "Fine day for a ride, ain't it?" "Mr. Wilkins," Sarah acknowledged coolly. "What brings you and your friends all the way out here? Must be important to justify such a journey." Wilkins dismounted, his companions following suit. "Matter of fact, it is important. Community business, you might say." He glanced around her property with poorly concealed curiosity. "May we trouble you for some water? Throats get mighty parched on the trail." Hospitality demanded she comply, though Sarah did so reluctantly, fetching water from her well while the men tied their horses to her hitching post. When they had all drunk their fill, Wilkins cleared his throat importantly. "Mrs. Winters, there's been talk in town. Travelers passing through reported seeing Apache warriors on your property couple months back. Said they appeared to be camping peaceful-like, not raiding." Sarah kept her expression neutral. I wasn't aware my visitors were anyone's concern but my own, Mr. Wilkins. One of the other men, a rancher named Porter who owned land far to the south, stepped forward. It's everybody's concern when someone's consorting with savages, ma'am. Those devils have raided 3 homesteads in the past year, killed good folks. Not all Apache are the same, Sarah replied evenly. Just as not all white men are the same. Some can be trusted, others cannot. Wilkins exchanged glances with his companions. That brings us to why we're here. There's concerns about your loyalties, Mrs. Winters, especially with rumors that you harbored an Apache boy and then returned him to his people instead of bringing him to town authorities. Sarah felt a cold anger rising within her. The boy was lost and dying of thirst. I gave him water and shelter until his father came looking for him. Would you have preferred I left a child to die in the desert? His kind would do the same to any white child, Porter muttered darkly. Sarah fixed him with a steely gaze. Then I would rather not be counted among your kind, Mr. Porter, if that's the measure of your humanity. Wilkins raised his hands placatingly. Now, let's not get heated. We're just concerned for your safety, living out here alone. Some folks in town are suggesting you might be providing information to the Apache about vulnerable homesteads, troop movements, that sort of thing. The accusation was so absurd that Sarah almost laughed. I barely know what happens on my own ranch, let alone elsewhere. I haven't been to town in 3 months, as you well know, Mr. Wilkins, since you keep accounts of my infrequent purchases. Nevertheless, Wilkins continued, the territorial governor has authorized the formation of a militia to protect our settlements. We're establishing regular patrols, and your ranch falls within our area of concern. Sarah understood the implied threat. They would be watching her, looking for any excuse to prove their suspicions correct. I have no objection to men riding the boundaries of their own properties, she said carefully, but I'll thank you to stay off mine without invitation. Porter stepped closer, his face flushed with anger. You don't seem to understand, Mrs. Winters. We're offering protection, unless you've got reason to refuse it. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. A lone rider appeared on the eastern trail, silhouetted against the morning sun. Even at a distance, Sarah recognized the proud posture, the distinctive way he sat his horse. Caton. The men from town reached instinctively for their weapons, but Sarah moved swiftly to stand between them and the approaching rider. That man is my guest, she said firmly, and he comes in peace. I'll not have blood spilled on my land because of your fear and ignorance. Wilkins and his companions exchanged uncertain glances as Caton drew closer. He was dressed more formally than when Sarah had last seen him, wearing a finely crafted leather vest decorated with intricate beadwork over a clean white cotton shirt, clothing meant for important occasions, not everyday wear. His long hair was neatly braided and he carried no visible weapons. He reined in his horse a respectful distance away, raising one hand in peaceful greeting. Sarah Winters, he called, his deep voice carrying easily across the yard. I come alone and in friendship. Sarah moved toward him, aware of the townsman's eyes burning into her back. Caton, she acknowledged, you're welcome here. The Apache chief dismounted gracefully, his gaze moving past her to assess the 4 men standing tensely by the porch. I have interrupted, he observed. These are your friends? Not exactly, Sarah replied quietly. Men from the nearest town, concerned about Apache activity in the region. Understanding flashed in Caton's dark eyes. With deliberate dignity, he approached the group, stopping at a distance that would not threaten, but still allowed conversation. I am Caton, war chief of the Chiricahua Apache, he introduced himself, his English clear and measured. This woman saved the life of my only son. She is under the protection of my people. Wilkins shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between fear and curiosity. We've heard about Apache raids on settlements to the north. Caton nodded solemnly. Those are not my people. The Chiricahua have honored the treaty with your government, despite promises broken by white leaders. We seek only to live in peace on what little land remains to us. Porter spat on the ground. Pretty words from a savage. Sarah tensed, but Caton remained impassive, his dignity making Porter's rudeness seem all the more petty. Each man chooses what lives in his heart, Caton said simply. Hate, or understanding. He turned to Wilkins, apparently identifying him as the leader. I give you my word. No harm will come to your town from my warriors, but I ask that you respect this woman and her land. She has earned the friendship of the Chiricahua through her kindness and courage. Something in Caton's calm assurance seemed to reach Wilkins. The storekeeper studied the Apache chief's face for a long moment before nodding slowly. Fair enough, he said finally. Mrs. Winters has always been honest in her dealings with townfolk. If she vouches for you and your people, that carries weight. He glanced at his companions. We'll be heading back now. Got what we came for. As the townsmen mounted their horses, Wilkins turned back to Sarah. No offense intended by our visit, Mrs. Winters. These are uncertain times. None taken, Sarah replied, though they both knew this wasn't entirely true. Safe journey back to town. When the riders had disappeared in a cloud of dust, Sarah turned to Caton with a mixture of relief and curiosity. Thank you for your words to them. They might actually listen coming from you. Caton's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Sometimes the unexpected voice carries farthest. He glanced around the ranch, noting the improvements Sarah had made since his last visit. The newly reinforced corral, the expanded garden where his gifted herbs now grew strong. Your home prospers, he observed. Thanks in part to your gifts, Sarah acknowledged. The healing plants have grown beyond my expectations. I've already used them to treat injuries and ailments that would have required a doctor's visit before. They walked together toward the shade of the porch, the ease between them surprising Sarah. In the months since their first meeting, she had often thought of Caton and his son, wondering how they fared, but never truly expecting to see them again. How is Nakohe? She asked as they settled on the porch steps. A genuine smile transformed Caton's stern features. He grows stronger each day and speaks often of the kind woman who saved him from the desert sun. He insisted I bring you this. From a small pouch, he produced a beautifully woven bracelet of colored threads and tiny beads. He made it himself. It is a child's gift, but made with a man's heart. Sarah accepted the bracelet with unexpected emotion tightening her throat. Please thank him for me. I think of him often. Caton nodded, then seemed to gather himself for something more difficult. I have come today with purpose, Sarah Winters. My people face a hard winter. Game grows scarce, and the reservation land they wish us to accept is poor for growing. Sarah frowned, concerned about where this conversation might be heading. I wish I could help, but I barely produce enough to sustain myself and my small herd. I do not come seeking charity, Caton said firmly. I come with a proposal. Your skills with healing plants and cattle raising would benefit my people greatly. Our women are skilled in weaving, pottery, and preserving food for winter. I believe we could trade knowledge to the benefit of all. Sarah considered his words carefully. You're suggesting some kind of alliance between your people and my ranch? Yes, beginning small, sharing of skills, trading of goods, perhaps in time, more. Caton's eyes held hers steadily. There is wisdom in both our ways of living. Together, we might find a path forward that honors both. The proposal was unexpected, yet somehow not entirely surprising. In the brief time they had known each other, a foundation of mutual respect had been laid, rare in these troubled times between their peoples. The townspeople would not approve, Sarah said, thinking aloud rather than rejecting the idea. Caton shrugged. They need not know all details. They see only what they expect to see. Sarah found herself nodding slowly. It could work. I could teach some of your people about cattle management, medicinal plants that grow here, and I certainly could learn from your tribe's knowledge of desert survival. Then we are agreed? Caton asked, a hint of surprise in his voice, as if he had expected more resistance. We are, Sarah confirmed, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Though I suspect neither of us fully understands yet what we're beginning here. Caton stood, extending his hand in the white man's custom of sealing an agreement. Sometimes the greatest journeys begin with uncertain steps. Sarah rose and took his offered hand, feeling the strength and calluses that spoke of a life both different from and similar to her own, a life of hard work, responsibility, and endurance. As they stood there, hands clasped beneath the vast Arizona sky, Sarah felt something she had not experienced since Thomas's death, a sense of possibility, of a future not defined solely by survival and solitude. "I believe," she said softly, "that this may be the beginning of something important, not just for us, but perhaps for others who come after." Caton's expression remained solemn, but his eyes held a